Good evening. It's nearly 6:10 now. I think we can start. My name is Dr. Linda Bello. I am the chairperson of CamDocUK, and I work as a GP in London. So welcome to this, our 8th webinar, CamDocUK, talking with the community. And today we're going to be talking about COVID-19 vaccines, care surprise. So why now? Why are we doing this now? Why are we out shopping and doing other Christmassy things? Well, as you know, a vaccination program has started in the UK where we are now, well, most of us, and a total of 137,897 people have received the jab so far. And this is being based on a group system. So far, residents of care homes for older adults and their carers, and those aged 80 and over, and those of us frontline health and social workers are in group 1 and 2. And those are the main people that have been receiving the vaccine so far. And there are 9 of these groups. We have been inundated in all our groups. I'm sure my colleagues will tell you, all of us here, with messages from our community worried about this vaccine, a term we coin as vaccine hesitancy. And this is not new. In fact, last year, the WHO listed vaccine hesitancy as one of the 10 greatest threats to global health. And what is vaccine hesitancy? It's the reluctance or refusal to vaccinate despite the availability of a vaccine. And we know that vaccination currently prevents 2 to 3 million deaths a year, and that we could prevent a further 1.5 million deaths if we can improve the global coverage of vaccinations. As a GP, I can see firsthand the impact immunizations have on the health of my patients, from the very important childhood immunization programs to the HPV vaccines, which have just been introduced to prevent cervical cancer, meningitis, flu vaccine, whooping cough vaccines. As a healthcare worker, I have received other vaccines like hepatitis B and TB to help me practice safely. COVID-19 is arguably the worst pandemic of our time. Globally, there have been 70 million cases and 1.5 million deaths. And here in the UK, where I am, 1.8 million cases and 63,000 deaths. In Cameroon, 24,000 cases and 443 deaths. We think, obviously, that the figures in Cameroon are underestimated. So this has had a significant impact. You know, these are people's families, people's sons, people's daughters. So this is not something, this is something very serious. Furthermore, I have seen the impact that COVID-19 has had on my patients, both the ones that have died and the patients that are living with the complications of COVID-19, the so-called long COVID. I have seen my patients who have once been gainfully employed and happy lose their jobs and become anxious and depressed. I also have several patients who, because they are immunocompromised, have not left their homes for the last 9 months, because if they get COVID-19, they're going to have serious complications. So surely a vaccine is our way out of this despair. We also know that although we, the BME, Black and minority ethnic groups, are at greater risk of getting this illness, getting severe disease, or dying from COVID, and we did speak about this at our previous webinars, we're also the group the least likely to engage with the program. We're therefore bringing you this webinar to provide you with credible information on vaccines and to answer all of your burning questions. So we have some excellent speakers lined up for you today. They're all experts in their fields. And our first speaker today, we've seen him before. He's a CamDocUK member. His name is Dr. Emmanuel Nsutebu. He is an ID consultant. ID means infectious diseases. As a consultant and a chief of infectious diseases in the Sheikh Shakhbout Medical City, Abu Dhabi. And he's the lead in the hospital of the hospital's COVID-19 response task force. So he does know what he's talking about. He's also the chair of the African Sepsis Alliance and a member of the WHO COVID-19 Therapeutics Working Group. So it's my pleasure to hand over to Dr. Nsutebu. Thank you, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Linda, for that very kind introduction. And I'm just going to share my screen and then start. So it's a real pleasure to be part of this event, which is very timely to engage with the public and discuss this very topical issue, COVID-19 vaccines. I have absolutely no conflicts of interest, no links to any company, and the views that I'll be sharing here are my personal views and not those of my employers. So we will be answering 3 questions today. First, why the COVID vaccines are important, how vaccines are developed, specifically how the COVID-19 vaccines have been developed, and then we will answer the 3rd question of, do they work? Do the current vaccines work? So when infections, when vaccines have a difference and reduce the number of infections, we tend to become complacent and think we can get away without vaccination. We have no doubt from an infectious disease and public health point of view that vaccines save lives. If we take the case of measles, measles used to be responsible for at least 2 million deaths a year amongst children in the world. And it's now responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths, significantly less because of the vaccine. Let's look at polio. Polio also used to be responsible for hundreds and thousands of children becoming disabled as a result of polio. It has now been eradicated from Africa as a result of the vaccine. Good news. You may not also be aware that we also have 2 approved vaccines for Ebola. And these vaccines are actually approved and were used in 2018 to control an Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the North Kivu province outbreak. Now, these vaccines were developed after the large outbreak we had in West Africa in 2014, where over close to 30,000 people were affected with Ebola and 11,000 deaths, including healthcare workers. These vaccines were developed also over approximately 2 years and have been approved and shown to be effective. So we have a history of responding and developing vaccines in response to an outbreak or pandemic such as COVID-19. So why COVID vaccines? Well, the simple answer is, this is our striker. It's like the Cameroon team playing in 1990 and bringing in Roger Milla or Oman Biyik. This is the game changer. When the going gets tough, you bring in your game changer, and this is exactly it. This is what's going to change things. Now, we all want to return to normal life. As an infectious disease physician and lead for our task force, myself and the people I work with, we are exhausted, we're tired. We've had to deal with the first wave of COVID-19, and now we're also dealing with a wave of people who don't have COVID-19, but are severely ill because they're coming to hospital late because they've been avoiding hospital with their illness. People with heart attacks, people with strokes, people with chronic liver disease, etc. We also know that you are tired. Normal life has to resume at some point. Professionally, our lives have been affected. Socially, family lives have been affected. We can't travel as much as we wish to. So this is the game changer. Public health measures work, we know that, but they're difficult. Wearing a mask continuously, social distancing, limiting overcrowding, lockdowns, those are difficult measures, difficult to implement. And many countries have struggled with implementing these public health measures, despite the fact that they work. We also know that a lot of the drugs that we used to use or we're using for COVID-19 don't really work. The only drug that we have really strong evidence that it makes a difference in terms of reducing mortality is steroids for patients that are severely ill and requiring oxygen with COVID-19. So we need something different. And the COVID-19 vaccine has the potential to save lives, stop people from developing severe illness, and a clearly very important objective, as well as preventing infection, preventing disease. But most importantly, and really interesting, there's data to suggest that it may also stop transmission. And that is also the game changer, because we may then be able to eradicate COVID-19 because of vaccines. So how are vaccines developed? Now, the key message here is no corners have been cut in speeding up development of vaccines, and certainly not developing of the COVID-19 vaccine. It's like building a house. If you give me £1 million to build a house, I can do that in a month with putting everybody together, builders, engineers, etc., and build a house. If you give me £1,000, well, it's going to take a year or more. And so we are at a stage now with COVID vaccines where we have in phase 3, at least 5 phase 3 studies that have been completed with COVID-19 vaccines, and we now have 3 that are already approved. The Moderna vaccine approved for use in the US yesterday. We have the Pfizer vaccine approved for use in the UK, US, and Canada. And we also have a vaccine from a Chinese vaccine, the Sinopharm vaccine, which is approved for use in the UAE. Now, before getting to the stage of the phase 3 trials, where there have been hundreds of thousands of people that have gone and have been involved in research, this is large data, hundreds and thousands of people involved in research. It's probably the intervention in COVID-19 where there's the largest amount of data and the well-constructed research. Before getting to phase 3 trials, there have been phase 2 trials where they've tested the effectiveness and the safety in a smaller group of population. There have been phase 1 trials where they've also tested the vaccine in healthy, small group of healthy people just to look at safety. And then they've also gone through preclinical trials before getting to the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Now, 2 things to mention. After a vaccine is approved and manufactured and for use and being used, there's still ongoing surveillance, ongoing monitoring to look at the safety and the effectiveness. But you would say in the past, vaccines used to take 10 to 20 years to be developed. Why has it taken under a year to be developed in this case? Well, it's a miracle. And it's really because of three things. First, there's been a lot of money put in to develop the COVID-19 vaccine. In the past, companies will be limited by funding. The governments have put in the funding and taken the risk away from the pharmaceutical companies and the researchers. So in the past, when they would go to phase 1, then look for funding for phase 2 and look for funding for phase 3, they've actually now had to plan from phase 1 right to phase 3 to approval without worrying about the finances. Also, the phases of research and development of the phases have been done in parallel, as you see on the right-hand side. So rather than doing one and then stopping and looking at data and doing the other, whilst they're doing phase 1, they're actually planning phase 2. While they're doing phase 2, they're planning phase 3. And that shortens the time period from phase 1 right to approval. Also, the company, the regulators that are involved in approving and assessing and approving vaccines are involved in all the different stages. So you have concerted efforts from academics, from clinicians in hospital, and from the pharmaceutical companies, all working together, sharing information, sharing data in order to focus and produce a vaccine. And that is what has led to it being produced in a record time under a year. No corners have been cut by regulatory authorities or scientists. So what are the different types of vaccines and how does it work? The first thing to say is the COVID-19 virus, the way it causes infection is by using a protein called the S or the spike protein. That's the main tool it uses to get into these cells and cause infection. The virus uses the spike protein. the main way of protecting your body, protecting itself against the virus, is to produce a protein called antibodies to block the spike protein. So all the vaccines that are available now and being produced are working on helping your body produce antibodies against this virus's spike protein to block it so it does not enter the virus. So how can you do that with the vaccines? First, on the right-hand side, you can use just the protein. You can use a modified version of the protein, the spike protein of the virus. You can produce it, manufacture it, and then inject it through a vaccine so that the body then produces antibodies and then develops protection against the infection. So one method is spike protein being produced and injected as a vaccine. The second way you can do that is by using the whole vaccine itself. And that means you can take the vaccine, weaken it or kill it completely, and then use it as a vaccine to vaccinate people so that they then produce antibodies against the spike protein of the virus because you have introduced the whole virus in their body with the vaccine. So those are the traditional ways of making vaccines. But these traditional ways, it takes time to develop. If you develop them in large quantities, it takes a lot of resources. And so scientists have explored newer methods of developing vaccines. Now, this is really interesting and important because this is the innovation. This is what has changed the game. Now, one way of developing a vaccine, newer way, they're new, not because they're brand new, I've never used them before. The Ebola vaccine, which I mentioned before, is actually based on this. And there have been other vaccines developed on this technology. And what you're doing with this new way of making vaccines is you're actually giving instructions for your own cells to produce the spike protein of the virus so that when your cells produce the spike protein of the virus, your immune system can then respond to it, produce antibodies, and then you become immune. And the way it does that, the way you do that is by introducing either the messenger RNA, mRNA, or DNA of the virus. And this mRNA or DNA, it provides instructions, information for your body, your cells, to produce the spike protein of the virus. And then your immune system can then develop a response to protect you. So this spike protein instruction, it's like a text message which is delivered to your body, to your cells, to produce the protein. And like a text message, it can be deleted, and it is in fact deleted after it produces, your cells produce the protein. It's like a Snapchat. It only stays for a certain amount of time and then it's deleted. So it does not last in your body and it does not affect your DNA or your own genes. So you have mRNA and DNA, and there are different ways of delivering the mRNA or the DNA into your cells. Now, if you just put the DNA or mRNA without delivering it with a vehicle, it will just get destroyed and it won't work. So one way of doing it is using what's called a viral vector. And by doing that, what they do is they take a virus which doesn't cause infection or causes mild illness in a person, and they just use it to transport this message, the mRNA or the DNA, into the cell. The other way is by taking the mRNA or DNA and putting a small, very small lipid droplet around it to transport the mRNA or the DNA into the cell so that you can then produce the spike protein, and then the spike protein is released from the cell. Your immune system then reacts to it and then causes antibodies, which then block the spike protein if you come in contact with the virus in future. So that's the way it works. And the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine and nucleic acid mRNA vaccines, and then we also have some viral vector vaccines. So what about effectiveness? How do they really work? Now, this is exciting, and for an infectious disease physician, this is really giving us a lot of excitement. We have excellent results after large studies that have been carried out assessing the effectiveness of this vaccine, and 2 months, at least 2 months of follow-up, and it's exciting. What I would like to first get you to focus on, I'm showing you 4 vaccines here, 4 different vaccines, is how effective they are. The data we have from these large studies involving hundreds of thousands of people is that they are at least 90% effective. And that is huge because as an ID physician, if you told me in the beginning of the outbreak, the pandemic, that we're going to have vaccines being more than 90% effective, I would have said no chance. But here we have it. It's huge. Now, we also know that these vaccines are not only effective in preventing infection, but with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, there is also this clear suggestion that it also prevents severe illness, because all the cases of severe illness were amongst those that had the placebo, those that did not have the vaccine. The same thing for the Moderna vaccine. All those in the trials that had severe illness, 11 were in the patients, the people who had placebo, not the vaccine. There is also a suggestion from the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine trial that it also reduces the amount of virus in the airways of those who had the vaccine. So it has the potential to actually reduce infectivity and transmission of the virus, which is huge, really important. Now, there are some differences between all these vaccines. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, it's a viral vector vaccine. It uses another virus to get the instructions into the cells. 2 doses are used, and it's stored at fridge temperature, and it really costs less than $10 US. The Moderna vaccine, which has just been approved in the US yesterday, it's an RNA vaccine, 2 doses as well, 21 days apart, around 95% effective, stored at -20 degrees, but it's more costly, $20 US. The Pfizer vaccine, which we'll hear more detail about, is an RNA vaccine similar to the Moderna, 2 doses, 21 days apart, 95% effective, but it's stored at ultra low temperatures, -70 degrees, and also costs around $20 US. And then the Russian vaccine, which has been research studies carried out mainly in Russia, is a viral vector vaccine, 2 doses, 1 month apart, 92% effective, and also stored at fridge temperature and costs less than $10 US. So we're in a situation where we have difficult choices to make, but all these vaccines are very effective. It's now all about how you store the vaccine, the cost of the vaccine, and what type of vaccine it is. We have difficult choices, but it's all good news, exciting. What about the inactivated vaccine, which has mainly been developed by the Chinese? And this is the whole virus, which is killed and then used as a vaccine. Well, the 3 vaccines that the Chinese have been working on, and all these have gone through phase 3 trials, and I'm sure they're going for approval very soon. The Sinopharm Beijing vaccine has already been approved for use in the UAE, where I'm working at the moment. And the UAE was part of a trial that involved 31,000 participants, a large number of participants from 125 countries. And the UAE Ministry of Public Health and Prevention has reported results. It's not peer-reviewed journal, scientific journal, but they reported 86% effectiveness in terms of preventing infection. 99% of the people who had the vaccine actually had a response producing antibodies, and 100% effectiveness in preventing moderate or severe illness. Again, really excellent results, and also reported no major serious adverse events. So we know that an inactivated vaccine also works, and I will be having my vaccine next week. So the take-home messages from this talk is we have witnessed a huge amount of loss of life and suffering as a result of COVID-19. This vaccine for COVID-19 is the light at the end of the tunnel, and we now have 3 approved vaccines for COVID-19 and others that will be following very soon. And this is what is going to bring us back to normality. When they are approved, and if you are offered the vaccine, the regulatory authorities would have gone through all the necessary checks. When they are approved and you're offered it, we recommend that you take it to save your life and save the life of other people. And I'll finish with this quote, this African quote: "I am because you are, Ubuntu." When you take your vaccine, you're protecting yourself, but also protecting the people around you. And this is Dr. Ngwa and Dr. Linda Bello, who you can see, our chair, who were the first CamDocUK members to take their vaccine, and there are many more that are going to have their vaccine. we're not just telling you to do it, we're also doing it ourselves. Thank you very much. I look forward to the question and answer session.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Nsutebu. Thank you. It was really, really interesting to hear that. I feel like I've really, you know, as a doctor, I've still learned quite a lot. And we had some very interesting comments in the chat. I would like to, there's 3 questions that have come up. I think you'll be able to answer them before we move to our second speaker. And this really good one, why, from an anonymous attendee, why do all of the vaccines require 2 doses?
So that's a really important question. So what you're doing with a vaccine is you're really trying to train your immune system to recognize the virus protein, that spike protein, and then cause an immune response. So it's a bit like going to the gym. You need to cause enough stimulus, enough training for your immune system to be able to respond. And because as I said with the mRNA vaccines and the DNA vaccines, there's like a text message. It doesn't last very long in your body. It's deleted essentially. So in order to get the adequate immune response, you need 2 doses to be able to push your immune system to respond to the level that is needed to provide protection.
And I guess that really means that you should not, you know, once we've got our first vaccine, like I had mine a few days ago, I was booked in for 3 weeks' time to get the second one. So I guess it's really, really important to make sure that you go and get that the second dose, because, you know, can you just explain that it's not going to be effective, obviously, if you just have the 1 dose?
Absolutely. So 1 dose is not effective. There is some immune response after the first dose, but the majority of the effectiveness is around a week after the second dose. So it's absolutely crucial that you have, when you have your first dose, you go back in a timely manner for the second dose, because that is when you're going to have the maximum response. And that is what all the research studies have shown. And
from Dr. Nigim Ali, can people who recovered from severe COVID infection get the vaccine? Or should I guess?
That's a really important question. Now, the reason behind that question is that when you've had the illness, you develop some protection. We don't know how long it lasts. We think it's probably at least 3 to 6 months, maybe more, but we're learning as we go how long it lasts. Now, in these studies that were the trials which I went through, these large trials for the vaccines, there were actually some people in those trials who had had COVID and also had the vaccine. And what they also saw within the trials is that those that had had COVID and had the vaccine also had a good response to the vaccine and also were protected after having the vaccine. Now, we also know from other infections that there are some infections where the protection from a vaccine is actually better than the protection from the illness. For example, the HPV virus. The protection from the virus is actually better from the infection. Is not as good as the vaccine. And so the recommendation is, even if you have had the COVID-19 infection, when the time comes and you're offered the vaccine, you should still have it, because it's likely to give you additional protection, and it's also safe.
Wonderful. And I think following on very nicely from that question is a question from Dimpna Sheshan. So should patients who have recovered from COVID-19 receive the vaccine, which you've said yes, but how soon after recovery? Is there a specific time frame that we know of yet?
So that is a really important question. Now, we can't really say based on what we know exactly this is the time when you should have the vaccine after you've had COVID, because I think we still need to study that more. However, in general, most vaccines, if you're given a vaccine after somebody's had an infection, you want them to have fully recovered from the infection. So that is something which you need to discuss with your your physician, your GP, for example, and really get clearance that you've got over the infection before you take the vaccine. But so that's, in general terms, that's what you expect. But if any doubts, discuss it with your doctor.
Excellent, very useful advice. We've got a few questions there for you on the question and answer. If you can just answer them in writing, I think that a lot of them are going to be coming. But again, thank you so much for that presentation. I think we're now going to move to our second speaker, who is none other than Ms. Susan Nkengasong. She is originally from Cameroon, but she's currently living in Ethiopia at the moment. She holds a BSc in Social Sciences and an MSc in Mental Health Counseling. She has worked at the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, and she's currently pursuing a doctorate in public health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Susan, over to you.
Let me share my screen. Good evening and greetings from Addis Ababa. Can you all hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Susan. Continue.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for such a warm introduction. It's really wonderful to be on this panel and also to be part of this interesting and exciting conversation. So the past week has really been an exciting week for all of us with the rollout of COVID-19 vaccine. Like any new therapy or treatment comes with its own challenges. And one of the challenges for COVID-19 vaccine is vaccine hesitancy. So before I get to my key points tonight, I want to make an open disclaimer that these are all my personal opinions and does not reflect my institution. So with that said, in the next 10 minutes, I plan to talk about the importance of vaccine that Dr. Subota has talked about, and then talked about the drivers for vaccine hesitancy. I'll talk about the challenges for uptake of COVID-19 vaccine. Then I talk about an interesting study that was conducted in sub-Saharan Africa, and the result or report were released 2 days ago. And then I will talk about the trust. So we all have heard and really an exciting presentation from Dr. Nsutebu, really an exciting and fabulous presentation on the importance and the effectiveness of vaccines. So we all know that vaccines are extremely important, and the current COVID-19 vaccine is meant for COVID-19 infection prevention. So we all know the value for and the benefit of vaccines. Growing up as a little child, we all know what vaccines have done for us. So the question for us, all of us now is, why is there a hesitance or denial for COVID-19 vaccine? Why is it that there is such a big controversy and conspiracy about COVID-19 vaccine? So here are a couple of drivers behind the conspiracy. We live in a global world where we are all interconnected. You know, I heard a saying that says, when China sneezes, America catches fever. So there is this power of interconnection. And so this connection comes along with all kinds of information on treatment. There are some of the informations that are really misinformation actually. You hear misinformation on treatment, misinformation on transmission, misinformation on diagnosis, and misinformation on vaccines. And so here on this slide, you see some of the misinformation that people carry around, that the disease does not affect people in the tropical areas. And then some of the misinformation is that COVID-19 does not affect poor people, that is a rich people disease. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about an interesting and exciting studies that was conducted again in sub-Saharan Africa. This study was looking at the feasibility and acceptability of COVID-19 vaccine in 15 countries. So on this slide, you will see the number of countries that participated in the study. The sample size of 15,000 people and in 15 countries, and they had such a diverse sample size in terms of gender, age, and education. So if you look at this slide, it tells you the number of countries that took part in the studies and the outcome in terms of acceptability of COVID-19 vaccine. So if you look at the first on your left, reading from my screen, is Ethiopia. It has an acceptance rate of 94%. And then the next is Niger with 93% of acceptability. Then Tunisia with 92%. At the right end, you have DRC Congo with 59%. So the result of the study came out, looking at the result of the data of the study shows that the uptake of COVID-19 vaccine in Africa is very high, with 4 in 5 respondents across the region saying that they will take COVID-19 vaccine if available. So if you look at this data set and the results of this study, it tells us that the Africans are ready to take the vaccine. They are prepared. They've accepted it and know that their benefit, that it is safe and it's effective. If there was the Nigerian TV actually showed a couple of refrigerators that have been created using solar system to show that they are ready, the country is ready for COVID-19 vaccine. So if countries are ready for the rollout of vaccine, my question for us tonight is, what are we waiting for? Why are we not part of this group that is part of the 4 that say, yes, we're ready? So I'm going to end with this interesting slide here. It's a story about a man who was sitting on his roof in a flooded city. So the city was flooded and he had been praying to God to help him get out of his roof. And so while praying, God sent him a boat. That was a rowboat. The rowboat stopped by and asked him and said, fellow man, shouted at him and said, jump in, I can save you. So the man looked at the boat and said, I don't trust this boat. The boat doesn't look safe. He said, oh no, thanks. I'm still praying. I believe God will send me another boat. So the rowboat looked at him, reluctantly went away. Then the second boat came. This was a motorboat. The motorboat stopped by and shouted at the man again on the roof and said, hey, young man, can I help you? And the stranded man looked at that boat and said, the boat doesn't look like it's safe. I really don't trust this boat to ride me across this ocean. So he let the second boat went by. Then there was an helicopter that showed up with a long rope. And the pilot looked at him and shouted and said, can you hold this rope? I will save you out of this drown. So he looked at it and said, I don't trust that rope. I don't believe in the rope. I really doubt the safety of that rope. And said, no, thanks. And then the helicopter flew away. He sat on that roof and finally got drowned. And a couple of days later, he died and had an interesting conversation with God. So when he met God, he asked God and said, God, I believed in you, I trusted you, and I was in trouble and I called upon you and you never answered me. So God looked at him and said, well, I sent a rowboat and I sent a motorboat and I sent a helicopter. You did not take any of them. What else did you want? So my question for you all tonight is, COVID-19, when the crisis started, we were all shocked. The world was in a standstill. Nobody knew that one day we'll all have a vaccine. This is the very first time in history when a vaccine is produced in less than 1 year, thanks to modern technology and advancement in science. We do not want to sit back and watch and let the boat roll by again, and we miss the boat. So my question for you tonight, are you still going to sit back and say, I'm waiting for another boat and miss the ride? Or are you going to join the boat and save life, save our economy, and save the world? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. Brilliant, brilliant. I mean, I couldn't have put it any better than myself. We need a solution, and we've got one, and we shouldn't wait for the boat to go by, for the helicopter. You know, we should take the chance when we've been given it, and this is what this vaccine is. Looking at our question and answer box, we've got a few questions there. Dr. Nsutebu has been answering some of them, but I was just wondering, Susan, I mean, we've seen your background there on, you know, you've done things in behavioral sciences and things. What do you think is the main reason why, you know, us, you know, many Black people, BME, why don't we trust? Why don't we trust? You know, why don't we trust this vaccine? What is it about the vaccine, or is it because we're in Europe and we don't think that, you know, it's been made by us? Why do you think that?
I think trust is part of a human desire and a human behavior. So in every situation, when there is a new treatment or a new disease, we always have that question of, what is this disease? What is it about this treatment? Is it gonna work? So we always have a question. We tend to question the issues around the disease. And part of the issue for our times today, or the generation today, is I call it the tsunami of misinformation. So because of the random misinformation that we have around our communities, especially the social media, has inflated the level of issues around trust in such a way that you can get an information that is really genuine, the evidence to back your information, but the level of trust can overwhelm that information or that evidence in a way that you tend to believe the lies rather than the truth about a particular issue or a treatment or a disease.
Okay, yeah. So we still got lots of work to do with that, and I guess that's why we have to have things like this, sessions like this, where you can see, you know, our community can see people that look like them, speak like them, and, you know, we only have their best interests in heart, and hopefully this will go towards a long way towards building some of that trust, as you mentioned. Well, I'm sure there'll be some questions for you at the end. I think we should move now to our third speaker, and he's none other than Dr. Valentine Ngwa. You all know him by now. He is our education lead here at CamDocUK and helps us run these webinars. He is a consultant physician in elderly and acute medicine at Mid-Yorkshire Hospital NHS Trust. He's an ortho-geriatrician and lead for National Hip Fracture Database. He's also a social gerontologist and research fellow in aging at the University of Lancaster. So it's my pleasure to introduce him again to you. And yes, Vali, before you start, just explain to us about the ortho-geriatrician and the social gerontology, so that our audience know a bit more about your background. Thank you.
Thank you very much. an ortho-geriatrician is an elderly care specialist that deals with elderly people who've had fractures. They work in tandem with the orthopedics because mortality in surgery in older people is quite high. That was found that when geriatricians are involved, the mortality is much better. And the social gerontologist is somebody who looks at aging, not from the biomedical model, which is what us medical doctors do. We look at the biomedical models, but aging has got a lot of other models, particularly the social model. So it's not just you aging, but your organs getting weak and stuff, but also how the society perceives people who are getting old. So both together actually is the best way to look at people as they get older. But that's thanks so much for this wonderful introduction. I will share my screen if I may. Right, I'm sure that's clear now. Thanks very much again. I will be speaking today, and thanks for my first two co-panelists who have succinctly and brilliantly set the stage, so we know exactly where we're driving at. I will be talking specifically on the mRNA vaccines. Dr. Nsutebu did speak about the different vaccine categories, and the vaccine that has been authorized in the UK is the mRNA vaccine of Pfizer, and that has also been authorized in the US. And as we know yesterday, the US also gave emergency authorization to the Moderna vaccine, which is also an mRNA vaccine. It is important for this discussion because it is a new form. It's the first time where such a vaccine has been rolled out. And of course, it's bringing a lot of misconception on the vaccines for COVID-19. I have no permanent ties with any pharma industry, I would say, and the views expressed here are solely mine and reflect my professional knowledge rather than the institutions where I work for. Now, let's talk a little bit about the mRNA vaccines. Though we're hearing them now because of COVID, they're actually not new. mRNA therapeutics has been in discussion in the literature right from 1990. And I could remember listening to the director of Moderna in a TED talk in 2013, giving a brilliant talk about the potential for mRNA to be used in therapy in many genetic diseases. And as Dr. Nsutebu also mentioned, we've been using that vaccine in trials before in Zika, in rabies, influenza, and in cytomegalovirus. I must say those were phase 1 trials, so they involved just a few people. But it's been studied and studied over the years and tested on human beings for at least 7 years. The reason why it was preferred from the traditional vaccine we've always known is because researchers and scientists thought that the safety profile was better, that when they give this mRNA in people, the half-life could be regulated to last just a short time, which means that its ability to cause your body to keep reacting to it actually could be shortened, unlike giving a live vaccine, which could stay for quite longer in your system. Because one of the main issues about any vaccines or mRNA vaccines in particular is the fact that you could have an allergic reaction to it. Now, it was also taunted as a very good vaccine candidate because of its efficacy. We're seeing efficacies of up to 95% with the Pfizer vaccine, which is something totally new for vaccines before. If you get vaccine for 30 to 40, 30 to 50, 60% efficacy in the past was good news, but here we're getting 95%. And unlike other vaccines where you have to grow the virus or part of it in the lab, these ones are easier to produce in mass quantities as well. So this has been taunted for quite a while. And let's not forget, this is not the first coronavirus. We've had SARS before, we've had MERS before, they were all coronaviruses. So there's been a lot of research in the background to see how mRNA vaccination could be used for any pandemic, and then COVID landed on our laps. It was at the right time for this vaccine to be rolled out. we have been quite worried. I mean, if you look at social media, there's been a lot of worry about the fact that the only way you could get a vaccine from March to December is that you cut corners. And just so our audience, who some of whom might not be quite familiar with how clinical trials do work, is there are regulatory agencies to make sure that everything that the pharmaceutical industry who are on the trials are saying is correct before they can roll these vaccines and medications out. And the UK, it is the Medicine and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, that's the regulatory body that approves any of these medications or vaccines. And so this authority went into work very early. We could remember the genomic sequence of the COVID vaccine was released in March this year, and the BioNTech pharmaceutical company started work then. But by June, the MHRA has already rolled out and asked for the creation of independent expert working group to make sure that safety is quite paramount in these vaccines. And by August, another working group of 48 specialists have been formed, and these are virologists, ID physicians, epidemiologists, pathologists, to making sure that they're also looking at it, because they are the ones who are going to advise MHRA. And by September, I beg your pardon, the laboratories were now already ready to start receiving batches of the vaccines so that they can do their independent tests. And you could remember, Pfizer submitted the first data and batches of vaccines in early October. So at that time, the MHRA has already constituted both independent and in-house agencies to not look at the data, to test all the safety information, to test some of the vaccines themselves. So each time the Pfizer was producing data, the MHRA was also analyzing at the same time. They were doing what they call the rolling review. So by the time that the final submission of data was done on November 23rd, the MHRA have already looked at quite a lot of that information, tested some of those batches of the vaccine to make sure they comply with standards. And so they had the final review. But it didn't just end there. They had to submit to the Commission on Human Medicine, which advises the government on things like new vaccines and new medications. And by December 1st, and that's how the final decision to approve the vaccine could come out at December 1st, which was roughly 9 months plus from when we already knew the genomic sequence of this vaccine. This is just one of the most important slides of my talk, because it is here to say that no corners were cut. But as Dr. Nsutebu also did mention, don't forget that you had massive funding from most governments to these pharmaceutical industries, such that finance wasn't the issue. So the development of this vaccine, I would say, was one time when science and people worked together. The pharmaceutical industry, the universities, the public health experts, the scientists in the field, and the governments all put their heads together to bring out something so beautiful, which I think, as my colleagues have said, is the game changer. Now, what's the safety of the Pfizer, Pfizer vaccine? Because it's quite important. Remember, we need to make sure that what we're taking can do what it says it can do, but it's also safe. We don't want to take something which we'll get up tomorrow and regret that if we knew, we would have not taken it. When a clinical trial is being run, particularly in this case of Pfizer, they have their safety committee in-house, but there's also an independent data safety monitoring board that makes sure that safety is being maintained, so they're working to standard. Then the regulators are also there with their affiliates. What they found out from this vaccine, again, that's after a lot of studies, well, there were two kinds of reactions. There were local reactions and systemic ones. But I must say, the science for vaccines say you mostly will get adverse effects in the first 6 weeks. And again, you could get more than that, don't get me wrong, but most of it is in the first 6 weeks. Now, some of the patients did suffer some pain and redness and swelling on the injection side. And most of it was mild to moderate, which means you might need more painkiller, a little painkiller to take it away. Very few of them had to have severe pain or swelling. There were some systemic reactions. Again, systemic reactions after a vaccine is an indication that the vaccine is working. Because, like as you heard before, it stimulates the body to produce antibodies towards the spike protein. So if the body is doing that, then there will be some malaise, some fatigue, some fever, some headache. But less than 2% of the participants in that trial had severe reactions. We also found out that people less than 55 years did have more frequent adverse effects than those above 55 years. I saw somebody in the question and answer ask a question about elderly people producing the same response to vaccines as younger people. This is a clear example. Those who are older than 55, because they were not mounting a more response than younger people, do not have more significant adverse effect. That we already know as a consequence of immunosenescence. As we go older, our ability to mount response towards vaccines are not as profound as those who are younger. We have used mRNA vaccines in small people for up to 7 years, I would say. But I think one thing we'll be very humble at this point in time is to say that we don't know everything about the vaccine. And that's the more reason why there's still surveillance going on. Pfizer hopes to monitor the participants for over 2 years to look for any long-term effects. Though we know that it could be more of it within the first 6 weeks. But again, one thing COVID has shown us is the fact that we don't know everything. And so it is with humility we say that some things we're only going to discover as time goes on. So long-term effects of this vaccine, say 2, 5, 10 years, we don't know. We will always see. The science tells us that it might not be much, but again, we have to be humble to say, let's wait and see how it goes. However, long-term effects of COVID as well, but we don't know. When COVID started, we believe that when you have COVID for 2, 3 weeks maximum, you'll be well and you're back to normal. But now we are seeing people many months down the line suffering more than they did when they had COVID. I will just take a short while to talk about some of the conspiracies we're getting now. But before I do that, let's first of all remember the conspiracies when COVID started. We were told, particularly those of us in the Black community, that Blacks don't get COVID because of their melanin. Well, we die proportionally more in the UK, more than any other ethnic group, and that COVID is 5G. However, if we could talk about all the conspiracy theories out there, I guess we won't finish here today, but I picked just this few to talk about. The first is the conspiracy that the COVID vaccine, particularly the mRNA vaccine, would cause some genetic modification. Now, if you watch the picture that Dr. Nsutebu was presenting here, the mRNA in the vaccine, which is wrapped around a liquid envelope and sent into the cell, doesn't get into the nucleus of the cell where the DNA resides and where your genes are. It stays in the cell, but out of the nucleus and in the little organelle called the ribosome, and that's where the proteins are formed. So it has little or no chance to modify your DNA because it doesn't get into your nucleus. I think there's one thing we really need to get on this. Some of the things we're getting with conspiracies is, and if you're not somebody who is on the ball with some of these issues, there's going to be a smooth talker who puts a few little facts together, wrap them around a lot of untrue things, and use his smoothness and passion and propagate false messages about mRNA vaccine. It doesn't cause genetic modification, and I'm sure all of us will be shocked to find out in the next 5 years that it does. There's also the conspiracy that it does. They've been cutting corners. Vaccines take 10 to 15 years. How come this one's taking just 9 months? I think we've explained in details how that has happened with this mRNA vaccine. The research didn't start in March. It's been happening for quite a few years before now. Now, the other one that you can get COVID from the mRNA vaccine is not true. There are some vaccines you can pick up infections from. Those are vaccines in which the virus is used, live attenuated virus being used. In the mRNA vaccine, the virus is not used. It's just the messenger RNA that goes into your cell and allows your cell to produce like a spike protein for your antibody to respond to. There's also the conspiracy that mRNA vaccine causes infertility. We don't know that. The science doesn't say that. And as I said before, these vaccines have been tried, albeit in a small number of people for about 7 years, and nowhere do we have any scientific evidence that it causes infertility. And the last one, let me say this, is that it is satanic and a means to inject us with some chemical. I'm not a religious scholar. I don't know much about Satan and satanic things. But I think that if anybody or any organization has the power to go through all the governments that they're going to deal with, go through all the regulatory agencies, all go through all the pharmaceutical companies and their monitors and everything to be able to inject us with a satanic virus, then those people have the power to do a lot with all of our food and drinks, which we don't know where they all come from, because most times I'm not sure I knew where the steak I had yesterday came from. I don't think it's the case. But we need to think carefully, because we are dealing with a virus that has caused significant mortality and morbidity, not just in the UK. I hear Africans say, well, Africa has defeated COVID. I listened to the chairperson of the Presidential Task Force for COVID in Nigeria, Professor Aliyu, who did opine that Nigerians above 60 years old who develop COVID, the mortality rate is about 25%. So the case fatality is 25%, which means it is killing in Africa as well. We know what's happening in Sudan and South Africa. So I think that we really shouldn't be saying those things without this data. And I'm glad to note from Mrs. Nkengasong's presentation that Africans are willing to get this vaccine. Let's not forget about long COVID as well. We know that it is not just you having had mild, moderate COVID, but 1 in 10 people who have had COVID will have lung problems with it in the lungs, in the heart, in the kidneys. And just yesterday, I think it's a few days ago, the NICE in the UK came up with regulations on how doctors need to manage long COVID. And one of them is that you have to warn patients who have had COVID that they could suffer for years and months to come. So we are not talking about something in which is easily dealt with. And sometimes if you go to our communities and you hear people say this is nothing more than the flu because they haven't seen anybody who's died from it before. And I would say, if you haven't seen anybody who died from it before, or you know anybody who died from it before, then you are either very lonely, you got no friends, you got no family, and you don't go to any work. If we have to go back to the place where we need to go back to our airports and go on holidays and go to our football matches and go to have our pubs and meet friends, then the only way we can do that, or one of the ways, let me put it that way, is to be able to get the vaccine in our large numbers. I just hope that this will be an avenue for our community to start getting back onto what we used to do before. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ngwa. You actually really covered all of the sort of burning questions, conspiracies, 5G, infertility, what have we not seen? And I think it's really useful to be able to have some context into what we mean when we say that this vaccine is a vaccine that is going to be used to modify us. We're going to become different people. We're going to have COVID. We're going to be controlled. And I think I really liked your point of view saying, listen, if there's an organization that that can control all these countries and make all of these countries want to have a vaccine, then surely they can do more than put it in a vaccine that everyone is already worried about, but put it in things that we can't do without: air, water, food, you know, Deliveroos and all the things that we use. So I think that's really, really important for us to really sit down and have a think about, you know, what we're actually dealing with here, and the number of people that are dying. You know, we cannot forget that, and we cannot just sit and say, well, we're not taking the vaccine. And so what is your solution? We need to have some kind of solution, and for now the vaccine is it. So thank you so much. There are a few questions. There's one that I've taken from YouTube, as we are also streaming live on YouTube. It says, how long does the protection last? I believe they're thinking from the vaccine. And I think if I could add to that, do you think that we're going to need to have it annually like the flu jab? Do we know much about that yet? I don't know if you, Val, or Emma want to take that.
Let me start, and then Val, you can add to that. It's really important question, and as Val was saying, Dr. Ngwa was saying, we're still learning about some of the issues with the vaccine. So we don't know how long it lasts, and we have to be honest about that. However, we know from COVID-19 infections that the protection that people get after the infection probably lasts for at least 6 months and probably a year. There are indirect studies looking at whether even after the antibodies that block the spike protein and lead to protection, even after the antibody levels drop, whether your memory cells, because it's not just about producing antibodies, you actually have some immune cells that are called memory cells that will be able to recover and remember the spike protein if your body were to come in contact with the virus in the future. So even when the levels of the antibodies drop, your memory cells may still be able to respond and then get your body to still produce antibodies. So from the infection, we think it's at least 6 months, probably a year. But you know, as we know, this is early, and we're developing the evidence as we go. With respect to the vaccine, most of the vaccine trials have followed up people for at least 2 months now. So we know that up to 2 months is still effective. And indirect evidence suggests it's probably going to be at least 6 months to 12 months. Now, the good thing about also the COVID virus is that, unlike the flu virus, it doesn't change very quickly. Even though there are some mutations, like you heard about the mutation in the UK, in Denmark, etc. Even though there are mutations, it's not really major mutations which make the virus spike protein so different that your antibodies won't work. And so it's likely to continue to be effective, even if there are small mutations of the virus, and most of the mutations that happen so far are not major mutations that change the virus. So we, in summary, we think it's going to be probably at least 6 months and maybe more years. That also tells us why we need people to get the vaccine, and get the vaccine the earlier the better. Because the sooner we can get people to have some form of herd immunity, the more likely we are also to be able to control the infection in the community and even eradicate it if we can. That's why we need to also vaccinate people quickly.
Wonderful. And good that you mentioned about the virus mutating. In London, where I'm working, we've had a spike in the cases because the virus has mutated. So I wonder if you could just add a little bit more about that, because I've had a few of my patients be really, really worried that this new strain is going to be worse than what we've had before. And is the vaccine going to protect against this particular one?
So really important question. And all viruses mutate and change as time goes. So this is not unusual. This is expected. And since the virus was found in China, in Wuhan, there have been different strains of the virus in different parts of the world. The L strain that was in China, in Europe, it's been the S strain, and the O strain, and others, the O strains. There have been different strains just because the virus changes But it, as I said, it does not change like the flu vaccine, where there are major shifts in the virus proteins. So there are minor changes, and so the S protein, that spike protein, stays more or less the same. So the risk is, and sometimes when the virus actually mutates, it can go both ways. It might either mutate and become less infectious or less deadly, which is a good thing, or it may mutate and become more infectious and more deadly. Now, we don't exactly know which way it's going to go in terms of the London and the UK virus they're mutating. But based on past experience from Denmark, where there was some mutation, we do not think at this stage that is going to render the vaccine ineffective. So please do still take your vaccine. It's still likely to protect you, even with the mutation.
Just to add this, Matthias, I think that's quite right there. But just to add as well that even if you were to do that with the vaccine, one of the advantages of mRNA vaccines is that it could easily be adapted depending on what strain is available. So I think that's one advantage that the mRNA vaccines have as well.
Wonderful. And we have so many vaccines. A few patients have said, well, you know, I'm just going to wait for the other ones to come, the ones that are not mRNA, and there's a few different ones, and I might not get this one anyway. And a few of my patients have asked me, you know, which one do I think is the best vaccine? So of the four that we've spoken of so far, are we just saying, well, they're all going to protect us anyway, take whichever one you can get and don't be too bogged down by that?
I think, yeah, that I showed you on the table in the slide that all the vaccines so far are around 90% effective. So they're pretty effective. There's slight differences, 95. It's still early on. So as we get more data and larger data, you may find that they all sort of fall at the same level of effectiveness, because there's also some chance for the data to be different just because of chance. But essentially, they're all very effective. The difference is more really in terms of the health system and storage and cost, et cetera, et cetera. So in my opinion would be, in wherever you are, when the regulatory authorities in your own country, region, area have assessed all the information and approved it, and they're offering to you, take whatever is they offer you, but take it as recommended. So 2 doses, 21 days apart, make sure you do that. We don't also know, an interesting point, we don't also know whether, because we're still quite early, whether you can actually switch from one vaccine to another, and whether if you've had one vaccine, you can actually go and have another vaccine. So the recommendation is, if you're going to have the vaccine, stick to one vaccine and use it as it is prescribed, rather than having one vaccine and completing your course with another vaccine.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. So the other things, I did see this in the chat, and I don't think I saw the answer to that yet. Some of our audience here are from Cameroon, other parts of the world. Do we know if the vaccine is available in Cameroon in any point? Someone was trying to ask if they could pay for it privately and get it. Do we have any idea?
So really a good question, and to the best of my knowledge, I don't think it is yet, just like it's not yet available in many African countries. And I think the question underneath that question is, how do we get this vaccine also to Africa and to our people as soon as? And there are a number of different things which you may have heard about the COVAX initiative, which brings together the World Health Organization, Gavi, and CEPI, and they work together to lobby and ensure that, as well as the rich countries that are purchasing large amounts of the vaccine, that these vaccines are also going to be available for countries that don't have the resources to be able to purchase large quantities of the vaccine, and also distribute them, because the distribution is also quite costly. If you're going to store a vaccine at -70, -20, you also need the systems to be able to store them. And so what they're doing is working to ensure that parts of the vaccines that will be produced worldwide, globally, will also be allocated to resource-limited countries. And also that is also all the infrastructure set up for approving them also for use in these countries and facilitating that process. And that's also being done at Africa level with the WHO Africa coordinating that with CDC Africa. And then there's also the infrastructure within the countries to receive the vaccine and distribute them and then decide on who exactly gets it. Because even in Africa, in Cameroon, we've got to make difficult decisions. We're not going to have vaccines for everybody. And the COVAX and initiative are trying to get countries to have at least 20% of their population vaccinated initially. So we've got to make difficult decisions about who comes first. And so within our countries, there has to be discussion in Africa and within our countries about who are the people you're going to prioritize. For example, healthcare workers and people at the front line, obviously first, because they're at greatest risk and they're looking after these patients. Then what about the patients who are most at risk of getting the infection and also complications and dying from the infection, such as the elderly and also the people with other conditions, such as high blood pressure and diabetes. But these decisions in Europe and America are not the same in Africa because we have a younger population. 6% of our population is under the age of 25. So we don't have that big elderly population that they have in Europe, in America. So we've got to make some specific decisions for our own countries about who we're going to prioritize first and also how we're going to deliver it to these people. Those are discussions that I understand are going on at the moment across Africa and led by WHO, Afro, and CDC Africa.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Nsutebu. Just to say, we've answered lots and lots of your questions. The recording of this is going to be available on YouTube very soon after within an hour or so, or even less on there if there's questions that you've missed the answers to. But we do have another question on the question and answer box. And I think, Dr. Ngwa, you did try to answer them. It before, but it was just about, problems with the elderly immune system. For example, the production of less B and T cells. Do you think the COVID-19 vaccines are less effective in the elderly? If not, should they be tailored to the elderly immune system?
Well, yes, I think that's a very good question. As we've always known, due to the senescence of the immune system as they get older, with less B and T cell functioning in the older people, vaccines have traditionally not been quite as effective as the younger people. Now, unfortunately, I must say we haven't really done a subgroup analysis of the data presented by Pfizer and Moderna in older people. And by older people, I'm talking about people above 75, if I might want to use that age as a cutoff arbitrarily. But it is as when we look at the response, so the adverse effects from the vaccine, the older people were coming down with less adverse effect than the younger ones. And the scientific argument is that the adverse effect is a manifestation of the efficacy of the vaccine because it stimulates your immune system to produce antibodies against the spike protein, and thereby you get some fatigue and some fevers. So if the fatigue and the fevers are more in the younger population, that means that they're responding to the vaccines more than the older population. It might just be therefore that the COVID vaccine will also follow the traditional route of vaccine response in older people where there's a less response. But that said, I guess as we roll the data and as we find out and try and do antibody response, we'll be able to have more information about this as time goes on.
Wonderful. And we just got a question in the chat, which kind of links with what Dr. Nsutebu was talking about. Just someone who's curious as to why COVID is less rampant in Africa, in particular in Cameroon. There's no social distancing, folks don't wear masks. Is there any rationale? Should one be very cautious when visiting these places? Or as wearing masks seems a little weird? What do we have to say to that?
Really important question, and it's a question that we've given a lot of thought to. As you mentioned in the introduction, I chair the African Sepsis Alliance, and sepsis and COVID are actually related. And so we have colleagues all across Africa involved in sepsis control that are also involved in COVID control. And we've just written a paper, which will be probably very soon about this. The first thing to say is there is a perception that Africa is not as affected as other countries. Now, it's true that it's not as much as experts we thought it would, but it's still significantly affected. One of the reasons why people perceive it isn't is because of underdiagnosis and undertesting. That's the first issue. The second point is one of the reasons why we haven't seen as many people severely ill or dying as a result of COVID-19 is because Africa has the youngest population in the world. 60% of our population is under the age of 25. This is an illness where one of the major factor for severity of illness and death is age. And so we have a young population. So we do having a lot of people getting infected, but they're not having severe complications because they're younger. However, those that are older and have other conditions, as Dr. Ngwa was saying, when you look at it in detail in countries where they are collecting data, for Nigeria, people over the age of 65, mortality is 25%, still high. And South Africa, for example, South Africa is 10th on the list globally in terms of number of cases, but also a large amount of deaths. So it's a misconception that it's not a problem in Africa. South Africa is suffering. My colleagues in Uganda are now preparing for a second wave, and they've seen a rapid increase in need for oxygen. So they're actually doing a lot of work to improve oxygen supply. Sudan also has huge problems with COVID, which you're not hearing about. So I think we do sometimes, especially some of us in the diaspora, we sit comfortably thinking it's not a problem in Africa. Unfortunately, those that are on the ground in Africa and looking after COVID-19 and controlling it, it is a problem. And there is actually a second wave that is going on at the moment. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Nsutebu. Well, I'd like to just go back to Susan. You know, you made a good point that, you know, a lot of us might say, oh, I'm not going to take the vaccine, but then perhaps in private, you know, if you're doing a survey like the one that you just talked about, they will actually take it. I wonder if you can just elaborate more on that study of yours, which I was really quite interested in when you first presented it to us. Unfortunately, I didn't see Cameroon in that list of people that took part in that. But can you think, are there any similar studies still taking part? And can you also just elaborate on, you know, why sometimes we say one thing and then in private we're going to end up taking the vaccine anyway?
Yeah, I think it's one of, the study is such a large study. If you look at the sample size, it's 15,000 participants. So that gives you a very good sample size across the region. So if you look at that sample size, it tells you that most of the people would definitely take the vaccine. Just the size of the study tells you that this study is genuine. If you could say it, and most of the countries, each participant was like 1,000 people randomly chosen. It's a national sample. So it's not like you go in a city and then take certain people, there was a national sample. So that gives you a cross-section of what people are thinking or what people are thinking about it. Excuse me, what people are thinking about a vaccine. So that will definitely give us a sense that the Africans give you a cross-section of what the people believe about the vaccine in the continent, which is a lot better than other regions of the world where the acceptance rate is pretty lower than what we have with that study.
Okay, thank you, Susan. We did have another question in the chat about immunosuppression and the fact that patients that are immunosuppressed should still be encouraged to take the vaccine. Can we please just elaborate on that? Because of course some of them might be worried about taking it, but actually they're the people that should be in the front of the queue to be taking it.
So it's a really important question as well, a really good question. And the answer to that is, first, people who have an immune system that has been weakened for some reason are at a greater chance of developing COVID infection, having complications, and also dying from it, unfortunately. So it's a high-risk group. So it's a priority group. The second point to make is the vaccines that we have at the moment, none of them are what they call live weakened viruses. None of them are. And the main issue with immunosuppression, if your immune system weak, is if you're given a vaccine which is a weakened vaccine, weakened virus, which can then potentially cause an infection in somebody whose immune system is weak. None of the current vaccines, the mRNA vaccine, the inactivated Chinese vaccine, is a dead virus, so it cannot cause complications in people whose immune system is weakened. So you have people who are immunosuppressed at higher risk of it. The vaccine is safe. It cannot cause infection in people whose immune system is weakened. On the contrary, it also, there's data from some of these studies that it actually still helps them to respond and produce and have some protection. So it is actually strongly recommended for people who have a weakened immune system for any reason. So if you're in that situation and you're offered the vaccine because you're in the priority groups, the recommendation is take the vaccine. If you have any other concerns, discuss it with your doctor looking after you, your GP or whoever's treating you, and I will answer your questions. But it is safe in people whose immune system is weakened because it is not a live vaccine.
Yeah, I think that's really...
Just to add on that, if I may. Just to add on that, if I may, on the trials, patients who had HIV, which is one mode where immune system can be weakened, were included in the trial, though they had stable HIV. So, yeah, just like Emma said, but some of these patients with immune suppression, the issue is they might not actually mount a very strong response as those without will mount. But yes, in the trials, people who had HIV were included in the trials and they mounted some response.
And following on that, there's a question about could you elaborate again about the immunosuppressed and the Pfizer vaccine? Someone has put on the question and answer chat.
So it's exactly the same principle. The Pfizer vaccine is an mRNA vaccine, and it's just using the modified mRNA of the virus, artificially produced, and using that with a lipid particle around it to deliver an instruction like a text message into your cells to then produce the spike protein so that your immune system can then recognize it and then develop an immune response. So it cannot cause real infection. Absolutely not. It's not a live virus, absolutely safe. And people whose immune system is weakened are less likely to produce an immune response to any vaccine. But we know from studies that they also respond. So the Pfizer vaccine is safe, and it also can protect people whose immune system is weakened.
Excellent. I think we have time for one or two more questions, and we're going to be wrapping up because it's now 7:40. There's a question from YouTube, and I think this is quite important because when you see all these videos, they're saying, well, one, either COVID doesn't exist or COVID is treatable. So there's a question from on YouTube saying, how can the efficacy of the African effective COVID-19 treatments, which are rumored on social media, be established? I mean, I think Val, you take that. Obviously, we had a webinar recently on COVID-19 and African therapeutics and things. So if you'd like to just answer that for our listener, our viewer on YouTube.
Yes, absolutely. I think like we said in the webinar, and I hope our attendees to go back and listen to our webinar again. There's a means in which you can assure the effectiveness or efficacy of any product, and unfortunately, it is not something which we rumor on the street as effective because one person took it and got better. But it is because there has been standard ways in which you can check the efficacy. If you look at this trial that Pfizer did, out of 18,000 people in the control group, only about 169 of them got COVID, clinical COVID disease, which means that the effective rate was just like 0.9%. So which means if you had taken that 18,000 people in the control group and given all of them water to drink, you could swear that water cured many of them from getting COVID or protected them from getting COVID. The same with people who've had COVID. Very few of them are going to die. We know that. The case fatality in some places is like 0.6%, up to like 2 point something percent, which means that if you take 100 people who got COVID, maximum who would die will be like between 3 to 5, maximum 8. But if you give all of them water to drink, they can go home and swear that 97 of them who got better because of the water. There has to be ways in which efficacy of a drug is tested, and a randomized controlled trial, like it's always been done, is the best way to do it. Without these African products going through a randomized controlled trial, unfortunately, they cannot talk about efficacy. They can only talk about anecdotal evidence in the future from the observational studies, which we know are full of confounders. We just said Cameroon has got a younger population that will deal with the COVID very well, which means therefore that if many people have COVID there, you don't give them anything, they would have got better. Well, it's not because you gave them that medication or that product that they got better.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think we'll take one last question and this one came from YouTube, from Eric Wango, and he's saying, I understand all vaccines should be fine, but it's been said that the Oxford vaccine should be better because it was based on the Ebola vaccine. Can you please elaborate on this? Dr. Nsutebu, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Apologies for that. Yeah, really great question as well. So the Oxford vaccine, the reported effectiveness is roughly average 72%. And in those that have initially had a dose, and which there was an error in the initial error made in the study, and some of the participants got half of the dose, and in those the effectiveness was around 90%. And so they're now looking at whether the half dose is more effective than the full dose. But we know that it's at least 70%, probably 90% effective, which is still quite high. The Ebola vaccine is also quite effective. Now I don't think the issue is that because the technology used in the Oxford vaccine, it's actually used an adenovirus, a type of virus that causes infection in chimpanzees, so it can cause infection in humans. It's the same sort of virus that's used for Ebola vaccine that's also used for the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. So I don't think it's going to be more effective because they're using that technology. However, what you should see in that is the fact that this technology and this platform is not something new. It has already been tested before with Ebola, and tens and thousands of people had that type of vaccine, and they've been followed up also for years without any without any complications, any major complications. So in terms of safety, we have data for safety for that platform of vaccine used for the Ebola, because it's a similar thing that's used for the AstraZeneca vaccine. But I don't think just because it's based on that platform that is going to be more effective. As I showed you, all the vaccines that have been published so far is at least 90% effective.
Excellent. So more questions coming in, but we don't want to keep people here all night long. What I suggest is you can, if you have more questions that we haven't answered, please go to www.CamDocUK.org. We have a question and answer box on there. Put your question on there. We will get Dr. Nsutebu, Dr. Ngwa, Susan Nkengasong to answer any of your questions, and we will send them via email. So on that note, I'd like to end by thanking you all for staying here for the last hour and a half that we've been here. Thank you for all the really good questions that you've asked. If I could ask the team behind the scenes to start their video so we can see their lovely faces. So Dr. Alan Bene, who is the communication secretary for CamDoc, and without her, the webinar would not really run, because she makes us she sets it all up. So we're like, Anna, you can never leave, because none of us will know how to work this webinar. And then we've got Christian, who is our webmaster, and he's actually all the way in America. So that shows commitment. He's the one that does all the wonderful flyers. I mean, this one he did in a record 24 hours to 48 hours while he was doing his his work in America. And Dr. Ngasa, who has been helping us answer all the questions. You may recognize him from a previous webinar where he was talking about his experience with having had COVID. So thank you all. But thank you as well to the lovely panelists. So Dr. Nsutebu, who, what time is it where you are now? It's it's nearly midnight, and who actually prepared for this webinar with us on his birthday. That shows you how much commitment he has towards sort of making sure that this was a very brilliant webinar. Susan Nkengasong, who came on at very short notice, and from Ethiopia to help us. Dr. Ngwa, what can I say? My right-hand person helping us with all the webinars. So it's been really, really wonderful. And thank you for all your support. What is the take-home message? I'm sure we've really rammed this in now, but please, if you've offered the vaccine, please consider taking it. I've taken it. I look fine. I'm okay. I had it 3 days ago. My arm was sore. I couldn't lift it up the next day, but that's it. I can lift it up. And as you can see, I was speaking normally today. I haven't changed. Read our position statement. So we've written a position statement about the vaccine. It's on our website, camdocuk.org. We did put the link on the chat box, so you can just click on it and go there. We watched this webinar. It's been a long webinar. There were lots of questions answered. It's going to be on YouTube in less than an hour. Beware of misinformation. Please, the fact that you see a WhatsApp video that says, Bill Gates has put a chip in it doesn't mean it's correct. We're all intelligent. Do your own research or reach out to us on our website, CamDocUK.org. And most importantly, I'd like to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year if you're in the UK, whatever tier you're in. Apparently, we can still have one household on Christmas Day. Most importantly, keep safe and COVID-free over this festive period. And I hope to see you all soon at our next webinar. It'll be in January sometime, end of January, we'll let you know. But that's it for now. Good night and see you again. Bye.
Bye.